am here to talk about the top 5 AppSource validation errors that Office add-ins can face when they're submitted. So we thought that this would be really helpful. We're doing a blog post on this, and we'll share that link out probably with the when we update the page that includes the information about this community call. We'll make sure that the blog link is there too. So I don't know how many of you actually submit to AppSource. And so we hope that this is really useful information to the community. The 5 top errors are usually these 5. Additional charges are not disclosed to users. The first run experience is unclear. Sometimes we've seen things where it just says sign in. It doesn't say what the add-in does, anything like that. There are no links for sign in, sign out, or sign up. The provider name doesn't match the publisher name, and the testing instructions are missing or inadequate for the reviewers to go through. So let's dig into them a little more. First up, additional charges are not disclosed. Some things you need to ask yourself: does your add-in have any dependencies on additional accounts and services? And particularly, do they require purchase? So if the user needs to pay for any of these accounts, any of these services, the add-ins are usually free. But if they're connected to SaaS offers or anything like that that require them to spend money, you definitely need to let them know. Next up, we have that the first run experience is unclear. So to continue from the first point, if one of the key things we have in the policies is that the add-in needs to have a clear value proposition. Why should I get this add-in? What's really so awesome about it? What are the benefits? So you want to make sure and have that description, like even on the add-in itself in the start screen, so that they've installed the add-in and maybe it was a while ago. Why do I have this add-in? What's the point? And you want to make sure that you have at least a couple of lines that explain this is what the add-in is for, this is what it can do for you, and that should be on the start screen of the add-in. Is the first run experience seamless? So first time they come in, they're not familiar with it, make sure that they can go through, it's seamless, it makes sense, and they can do what they're trying to do. If it needs to have sign up or sign in, there's another thing, error that's related to that too. I'll go into a bit more about that. But if they need to sign up with some account, you want to make sure that that's clear to them in the UI before they sign up for something. If, however, it's targeting enterprise like larger organizations, then you don't necessarily need to explain about the value proposition, because the assumption is that the company installed it through centralized deployment or something like that. But you still want to make sure that there's information on there, a link to a site or an email contact, so that the users in that enterprise can contact you and say, hey, I want to know more about this, or send them to a link so that they can read for themselves. Next up, no links for sign in, sign out, or sign up. So it's like, hey, here's a sign-in screen. It doesn't say what you're signing in with, anything like that. And so you want to make sure that that information is very clear on the add-in sign-in screen. If they need to sign up, you want to make sure that all those links are really clear. They know exactly what they need to do as they go through the add-in experience. Is there an easy link to sign out once they're in? Those kind of things. Again, if it's targeting enterprises, then you don't need to have it if the enterprise itself controls that login situation. And so as long as the individual user doesn't need to go and figure out what account I need and those kind of things, and this is maybe something that uses single sign-on with the enterprise work account, then it's managed by the enterprise, and you don't necessarily need to have all of this information on the add-in itself. Okay, fourth one is the provider name doesn't match the publisher name. This one is really important because there's a provider name element that I'm thinking a lot of you are familiar with. In the manifest itself, it's pretty near the top, if I remember correctly. And that basically says company X or ISV Y or whatnot, they're the ones who created this add-in. So when you go in now to AppSource and you're uploading your manifest, they check to make sure that the publisher account you're using to submit your add-in, that the information matches. So it would be not so good if you have like Microsoft, let's use Microsoft as an example, that says, I'm using a Microsoft publisher account, but my add-in says the provider is Google. Seems a little iffy to me. And so we check for that kind of information to ensure that the add-in is coming from this particular publisher. So they need to match up. And we want to make sure that when the person goes onto AppSource and they see this is the publisher, that when they actually use the add-in and look at the add-in metadata, for example, that they are in sync and doesn't cause confusion. And last up, this one is the testing instructions. This one is really important for particularly going through the AppSource validation and verification process. And so we have the certification process means that the reviewers, especially depending on how much volume they have, they really don't have the time to come back to each person and say, hey, we need this piece of information from you, or we need clarification on this, or we need the test accounts, or we need keys, or all those kind of information. So what you want to make sure you do is when you submit your notes for certification, if you upload a document that includes screenshots and those kinds of things, you provide information like the test credentials, especially if they need to have an account, if they need to pay for something. We can't have the reviewers trying to go through the purchase process and all that kind of thing. And so what you need to do is provide those kind of credentials. If they need product keys, provide those, any kind of test data so that they can successfully get through the process of using your add-in without having to pull out their own credit card, which would not be reasonable to expect. So there are some other things, like if it has custom functions, which some of the Office add-ins can support in Excel, then you want to make sure that at least one of the custom functions, you're very clear about how the tester or the certifier needs to go through and use the custom function so that they can try all the others. You don't necessarily need to explain how all of them work, but you at least need to give an example so they have an idea how to do the others. We really suggest that if you have super complex add-in scenarios, or it would just be really helpful to have screenshots going through the flows so that the reviewer knows what to expect. So there is an option that instead of using the notes for certification box, which gets refreshed every time you submit, then you have the option to upload a PDF version of it, and that actually gets kept throughout submissions. And so you don't need to re-upload it every time, which is really helpful, especially if you end up having to resubmit a couple of times and the testing instructions are comprehensive enough that they don't need to come back to you and go back and forth with it. So Juan is on here as well. He is our key point of contact working on the validation flow. So I appreciate him going through and looking at the questions. I'll do so once I'm done here. So those are the top 5 things. We also included some resources here. The key marketplace policies that apply to Office add-ins. They're general policies that apply pretty much anything going on to the marketplace. Office add-ins are considered part of M365, so those policies can also apply. And of course, the Office add-ins policies. We still recommend that you go through all of these certification policies because depending on what features you're using or what you're connected to, like particularly the SaaS apps, for example, then there are some policies that apply to that specifically. And if your add-in is connected in that way, you want to make sure that you read those policies and meet those requirements as well. There are also a couple of document pages that are like the checklist, the submission guide. Those have like screenshots and steps to help guide you through the process. So that's basically all I had. Once we have the blog published, we will make sure that we have that information posted with the recording of this online so that you have that information when that goes up. So I think that's it for me. Thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions you want to mention, let me know. But I'll be checking through the chat after this. Thanks, everyone.